Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we're going to continue down the dark and uncertain path away from the usual channel content. And today we're going to take a look at scary stories that have occurred while people have been doing fieldwork. Stories that will make you really reconsider if you ever truly want to leave the office again. Number 1. I want to begin this story by saying that I 100% do not believe in the supernatural. Okay, that's a lie. After this encounter, I'm 30% sure I 100% do not believe in the supernatural. Let me begin. I'm a biologist. I study flying things, specifically bats. It was February 2020 and myself and my team had just set up camp deep within the Amazonian rainforest to catalogue the bat population in a disturbed area. The air was crisp most nights, like a sharp knife cutting at your skin. It was common protocol to cover your body fully when in the rainforest because things that bite you tend to leave a permanent mark, a scar, or a death certificate. But the insects, spiders and snakes were the least of my concern. My concern was, and always has been, the data. So with that in mind, my team and I worked through the night, every night for the past month. We catalogued many species, each more interesting than the last, and I could fully understand why biologists everywhere agreed that tropical rainforests were the best landscape to study ecology. But I'm not here to tell you the difference between Carolinae and Phyllostominiae. Those are bat families, for your information. While we were out in the forest, we encountered something. I don't know what it was, and this is just me being completely honest. It never showed us its face, never approached our camp, but we always knew it was around. The disturbances began the first night, at the time the camp was first set up. Upon a routine check of our mist nets, which are harmless stationary nets used to catch bats, I wondered why they were closed, after I distinctly remembered opening them. Why the clothes that I had left to dry were flung from a makeshift clothesline into the mud. The forest was so thick I didn't think a strong enough breeze could do it. And it wasn't a case where the nets were knocked over by passing wildlife or messed with by my team. No, they would be properly closed as if indicating the end of a night's work. Strange, I didn't think much of it, and I concluded to be silly camp pranks. By the third and fourth night, however, the disturbances got more bold. We often heard the sound of crunching leaves and the snapping of twigs close to the camp, as if someone was out on a walk, even though everyone was tucked in tight into their hammocks. Then came the whispering, the strange, ethereal whisper of my name in the forest. There was one instance where I had to use the bathroom and simply refused to leave my hammock until the sun came up. There was malice in that beckoning. There was evil within its tone. By morning, everyone in the camp was irritated and restless due to the lack of good sleep. Some would choose to spend the whole day sleeping so they could stay awake long after the data collection was over for the night. I could sense that everyone could hear it calling at night, and like me, no one chose to answer it, nor go to sleep out of fear of being snatched away or something. If only I could say the disturbances ended after the whispering and name calling. No, my friend, it only got worse. You see, this thing mimicked our every move, followed us wherever we went, played with our sanity, and made us question what was real and what wasn't. One night it got so bad I screamed and thrashed around in my hammock after being roughly shaken by the hammock's ropes. I felt something breathe in on my face and give a giggle before I could even open my eyes. Once everyone's torch was on, we heard it scurry off into the nearby trees. By the next camp, everyone had agreed to sleep with a head torch on or a candle next to them, but the harassment wasn't kept for bedtime anymore. Oh no. I was afraid to check the nets by myself due to the constant sound of it running towards me from the shadows, each step louder than the last. It no longer whispered my name, but instead screamed my name at me from a distance, adamant to have me follow its call. I refused. We all did, and that only pissed it off more. Food eventually started going missing, clothes were tossed into the nearby river, and our GPS equipment began to give trouble. Luckily for us, we had arrived at our final camp for surveying. I couldn't tell you the agony I felt, the fear, the vulnerability. I felt its eyes on my skin whenever I took a bath in the river. I felt its breath in my ear whenever I sat in the rainforest stillness, journaling my findings. Even the bats stopped coming to our nets by the last camp, a behaviour I sensed was due to the foul energy this thing brought. We heard no monkeys calling over during the day. The birds chirped and sang only when the sun was the highest in the sky, and all our remaining meat went missing. All of it. although that later was debunked and was turned out to be a juvenile ocelot. I was so happy to be out of that fucking rainforest by the end of our fieldwork. The local guides had hired a speedboat to take us back to our Eco Lodge base that we would be staying at for some R&R. Strange as this will sound though, I will never forget the overwhelming feeling of not wanting to leave. Don't get me wrong though, my rational brain wanted nothing more than to giddy the fuck up out of that camp. But there was this pit in my stomach as if I was leaving something unfinished. By the time we got into the speedboat and we were untying the ropes so we could head off, something told me to look back at the opening of the campsite. And there it was, standing stiff, naked, filthy, and with a huge smile across its face. It waved at me, slowly, and it also strangely resembled me. Or at least, a fucked up version of me. I screamed and pointed at it before the local guide covered my eyes and told me not to acknowledge her. That's a Kanamia, a vengeful forest spirit. It wants you and your team. Don't engage it. Keep looking forward, the guide whispered to me. He then urged the captain to start the boat, and off we went. The speedboat kicked up speed and we hightailed it out of there. I couldn't get that image of a twisted, decaying version of myself out of my head, and it morphed into me. Why me? Why does it look like me? I asked the guide, crying and shaking as my fear and denial bubbled up to the surface. He responded saying, when people like yourself venture too far into the forest will sometimes respond, sometimes in kindness, sometimes in anger. The Kanamia takes the appearance of which it was sent to kill. If it were successful into luring you deeper into the forest, it surely would have done so. I'll never be more thankful of myself and the team for following our guts and ignoring the Kanamia's harassments. And I can definitely say that while protection from snakes, spiders and toxic insects is important when working in the Amazon, a strong sense of spiritual grounding is just as important. Be careful out there, kids. There are things far more powerful than us and way more intelligent. Number 2. When I was in graduate school for ecology, one of my field sites was in Central America. My principal investigators were extremely anal about safety, but gave very few details or tips. I've lived in a share of places before, some less safe than others, but generally you figure out right away what places you need to avoid, and I was generally annoyed at the retroactive advice. I lived at a station at the back entrance of a forest reserve, and after a few weeks there with limited transportation, I walked along the main road to a local swimming hole and got right back after dark. When one of my advisor's colleagues found out, she absolutely chewed me out like a parent disciplining a child. I was 24 years old at the time and wasn't impressed no one had warned me in the first place. She said it wasn't safe to go out walking, period. But at this point, everything and everywhere was labelled as unsafe, so I just brushed it off. My second trip down there I wasn't under constant supervision and was with another student slightly older than me to help out. We had a car this time, and because we could only work in the canopies until the afternoon, we spent that time exploring. One of those days we decided to go to a regional park a little further from the national forest we were in, and then we were going to use the back road that appeared on the map to try and make our way to the coast. There was one town everyone told us to bypass further south, as it was a well-known hotspot for drug trade between South America and the States, but we figured it was far enough away that it wouldn't be a problem. Sometimes the GPS can be really strange where we were and isn't the most reliable, but I'd had several good weeks of exploring, so the further we got into the foothills, the more and more rustic the road was. The alternative was backtracking almost an hour, and we would have meant that we probably wouldn't reach the beach until sunset. But as we drove along, we both started to get an uneasy feeling. The road became more and more dilapidated, and when we'd see houses, the owners would hurry inside or shut their windows. It was almost like a western when someone rides into town and everyone closes up shop. This is setting off enough warning signs that we decide to turn around ASAP. We're on a ridge that has a tight hairpin turn and a cluster of houses below, and in the back we see tons of cars, fancy ones that were very out of sync with the beat up homes. Some were stripped down. Car theft is very common here, so we just reasoned that they were essentially a backyard chop shop. Then out of nowhere this guy steps into the road with a machete. He has this crazed look in his eyes and we stop dead in our tracks. And it's not just a regular kind of knife like you see in the States, but this thing is practically a 3-foot sword. My colleague and I say screw safety and start driving backwards. At least we get boxed in somehow, and then pull a U-turn as soon as we get to a larger stretch of the road. I zoom out at the map and it turns out that this little cluster of homes is the direct midpoint between the smuggling town and the northern port. We were on the most efficient route through the mountains if you wanted to avoid main roads, and upon talking to some locals back at the station, We reasoned we'd found our way onto a drug smuggling route in a government-owned vehicle as two people who were clearly not locals. I don't know if we were being scared off, about to be mugged, or something worse. But very clearly it was not a place where outsiders were welcome. On my final trip down before graduation though, I got even more details on my field station. I was driving with a friend down another back road through the National Forest, the one I took my first walk down here. We were picking up a friend at another field station, and it was the only route, but it had more traffic than our other adventure. About 3 miles in, there's this nice SUV sitting in the middle of the road. I'm a little tipsy, so I don't think too much of it, but the driver gets really tense and gets ready to put it in reverse. Then the SUV moves out of the way, and the driver sighs in relief. Apparently this road is where people would come from the city an hour away to do drug trades and other sketchy business. He was preparing for us to get jumped. It's far enough away that the cops don't care, and the main entrance to the National Forest is gated. There's no camping allowed in the park, so unfortunately the only people travelling this late in the evening is generally researchers or people who desperately don't want to be seen. Then he lets me know that the week after I left my last field campaign, a half-burned body was dumped at the entrance of my field site, and that's when I was very happy I was done with my fieldwork there. I really thought my principal investigators were just anal, and they likely were. Many of their other concerns were blown out of proportion or shrugged off by locals, but keep me from doing anything actually made my experience more hazardous in the long term. And that city I mentioned earlier, about a year later, it was really confirmed how dangerous it could be. My first job after I graduated was monitoring long-term ecological studies across North and Central America, and I had a field site very close to that town known for trafficking. In between accepting the offer and starting the job, I was told I'd no longer be overseeing the site, and they pulled funding for it entirely. HR actually laughed off when I asked about logistics for the visit when I first started, because it was something we discussed in the interview. I wasn't happy about going anywhere near there, but it was a really small component of the job. Turns out the equipment kept being stolen from the site, so they hired a team of security guards. One day, just at shift change, some guards never arrived. The new crew found them shot execution style. So if your principal investigators or superiors tell you to do something and be careful, you really should, because it's not safe out there. Not everyone cares about ecology, and the world can be a dangerous place. Number 3. I work as a biologist for a zoo, and I've been told some stories from senior staff and security staff who I've known for years now, and I can say that they are level-headed and rational individuals. I've never paid too much attention to these stories, as I hadn't experienced anything myself until recently, and I can say for certain that what I've heard and experienced has no rational explanation. One of the unusual occurrences described by security staff is that there is a lady that appears in the park in the middle of the night and begins to scream. They call her the Red Lady due to her wearing a red dress, and apparently now when they hear her scream at night they don't even bother to go check, just because of how often it occurs. As to her origins, I do have a few theories. A few decades ago, where the now existing tiger facility sits, there were bird aviaries. A lady had gone back behind them and shot herself, taking her own life. Now, as to the validity of the story, I can't verify it, as I've never been able to find any literature on it. But there is one I can verify to be true. A few years ago, a call came over the radio from security instructing us to not comment on the body that's being pulled from the lake. I had no idea what was going on, and I never heard them comment about it again until I saw it all over the news the next day. I should probably point out that the zoo sits inside a large area of land that was originally set aside as a reservation for some Indian tribes. Apparently, right outside the zoo in one of the surrounding lakes, a human body was found. The firefighter said that they, quote, weren't sure exactly how long the person had been in the water. As for who it was or what happened, I'm not sure. The circumstances were surely strange, and what made it even more was the lack of media coverage afterwards. No one ever talked about it again, and whenever I've mentioned it, no one seems to want to talk about it. Now, onto my eye-opening experience. Some time ago, I was off-site doing a presentation with North American vipers late at night. After the presentation, we were headed back to the zoo on some back roads inside the park, and we noticed that our tires were flat, so we had to stop. While my superior was assessing the tire situation, I noticed a toad crossing the road. I watched as the toad hopped along, and that's when I looked across the road, and over in a dense tree line, I immediately locked eyes with a woman who was peering at us from within the tree line. I couldn't see what she was wearing. All I could see was her face with the amount of foliage. She just stood there, motionless, looking back at me for what must have been 10 seconds, but felt like eternity. As my superior finished assessing the tyres, he started to come around the side of the car, and as he did, this lady with inhuman speed darted sideways, disappearing into the tree line. She didn't turn and run like a normal person. She literally just moved sideways. There was only myself, my superior, and 2 security guards in the park at the time, and that I am certain of. As that happened, my heart skipped a beat. It was so fast. I didn't think my superior saw. I asked him if he saw it, and he casually made a comment about the toad. He then instructed me to get back in the car, which I did. As we continued through, I called the security to let him know what I'd seen, but I got no answer. I called them repeatedly until someone finally answered. It's unlike them not to answer, but I brushed it off. They assured me there was no one inside the park except us. After I put the animals back, me and my superiors split up for the night. I was heading towards the back, and I, for the first time, heard the red lady scream with my own ears. It was a hysterical, banshee-like human scream. Clear as day, up the trail, very close. It wasn't an animal. I called security and they immediately answered. They told me, again, not to worry. No one's in the park, and have a good night. And it all seemed too casual to me. I will never forget what I saw on the tree line that night. And I will never, ever forget the screams. So that brings us to the end of today's video, and I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah, it's just really nice to follow up the last video, which did absolutely amazing, with something that sort of tied back in with ecology to keep it, on team. And I just really enjoy making these videos because I love reading these stories and listening to them, and to actually get to narrate them and edit them in my style is just completely unique, and I love it. Still a bit uncertain on which way we'll go with the channel from here, whether I'll continue the narration videos or will I go back to something a bit more ecology related on a permanent basis, or keep it as a mix of both. I think mix of both kind of gives me the opportunity and the audience to give a nice mix. But yeah, hopefully you all really enjoyed the video, and I have another one coming up very soon, and hopefully that will be a bit more freaky, and because those ones they're the best to make and narrate. So yeah guys, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you all next time.